And it's time now for our political panel. Amy Walter is national editor of the Cook Political Report and a host of WNYC's The Takeaway. Reihan Salam is the executive editor of the National Review and a contributing editor at The Atlantic. He's also the author of a new book, Melting Pot or Civil War. Seung Kim is with the Washington Post and has had a very busy week chasing the twists and turns of the Kavanaugh story, which are still twisting and turning. And Dan Balz is the chief correspondent at the Washington Post. Welcome to all of you. Seung, I want to start with you. The twisting and turning continues. We heard from another person who was allegedly at this party last night. Give us the latest on kind of where things are with this hearing and what's going to happen.
So it is still not confirmed that there will be a hearing. Let's make it clear. There seemed to be some optimism from our sources last night who've been involved in these hearing negotiations that they might be tentatively, keyword tentatively, moving towards a Thursday hearing. But there are still differences between Dr. Ford's team, legal team, and Senate Republicans who will be running the committee in terms of how they want the hearing to proceed. Obviously, they had been haggling over the date. There's also a question of do you have not senators' question, but another attorney's question, Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford and her team have requested that senators do the questioning. But Grassley, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, said he wants to reserve the option of having some female staff attorneys, keyword female, do the questioning there. There had also been some disagreements about whether you can subpoena Mark Judge, who is the friend who is alleged to have been there when this incident happened, or alleged incident happened. So still a lot of differences between the two parties, but we'll hopefully know more later today.
And Amy, obviously the point there about the men doing the questioning immediately takes us to, this is fraught because of the subjects and the issues, but it's obviously also highly charged politically.
Absolutely. The thought of there are 11 men on the Republican side questioning a female about this issue is definitely fraught. The other issue, and I saw this in the USA Today poll that came out right before the weekend, we're asking voters too about their opinions about sort of who comes out winners and losers in this. Not surprisingly, everybody comes out looking not particularly good. Plurality saying they think that these hearings ultimately are going to hurt Republicans and their chances to hold the Senate, that it's going to hurt Donald Trump, but that by 20 points, it's going to also hurt the Me Too movement. And I think that it's just fundamentally the belief, and I think this is where we are in this country too, it's just one big mess. Nobody's going to come out, this idea that somebody's going to be a winner and someone's a loser from this, we still can't talk about the issue of sexual assault and sexual harassment. It's still so fraught, and now put it in with our polarized political times, it's a mess.
Well, and it's not just, Reihan, the question of winners and losers. It's a question of, can we get to the truth in this venue, given the time that's passed and the facts of the case? Ben Wittes put it this way in The Atlantic about Kavanaugh. He needs to prove a negative about events long ago with sufficient persuasiveness that a reasonable person will regard his service as untainted by the allegations against him, and he needs to do so using only arguments that themselves don't taint him. Just giving you a sense of the stakes of this thing.
And it also may well be impossible for this reason. Remember, before these allegations, the extent of partisan enmity was so deep and wide. There were people who believed, just Brett Kavanaugh, he invokes a certain type to people, right? There are many people on the left who see his face and they think this just represents this brand of republicanism I find repellent. Similarly, on the other side of the street, you have people who are deeply suspicious of those seeking to undermine Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is someone who has been in conservative legal circles for literally decades. He has been a mentor to many, many people. Whereas if you look at his accuser, Christine Blasey Ford, she is someone who represents to many people experience that they themselves have had, right? So this is so deep, and it goes to the fact that Democrats and Republicans are now saying, I don't want my child marrying a member of the other political party. You have to understand this in the context of that serious political partisan animosity.
Right. And then, Dan, we have had during the Me Too movement, a lot of people have learned about why people do or don't come forward, the nature of what these kinds of events, and everybody has said, as Nikki Haley said, we should listen to and be grateful for people who come forward. Into that conversation, the president tweeted, I have no doubt that if the attack on Dr. Ford was as bad as she says, charges would have been immediately filed with local law enforcement authorities by either her or her loving parents. That seems quite discordant with what we've spent the last year or more learning about the nature of these kinds of incidents?
It's completely discordant, John, and it's also completely against what the president's advisors had been advising him. And for a number of days, he seemed to be restrained and careful in the way he was approaching this, and then he kind of fell off the wagon. But it is a reminder that this is a partisan moment. So the Me Too movement has clashed into the polarized American electorate over something fundamental, which is an appointment to the Supreme Court. So when you wrap all of that into what this hearing could be like, as Amy said, there's not going to be winners and losers. Many people have already made up their mind about who's telling the truth in this case. So the difficulty of conducting a fair hearing in which people, in one way or another, have their minds changed seems very remote.
And Seung, are we going to get into a situation where, I mean, how broad do you think the questioning will be? Not just about the facts of this one particular night. How broad do you think we might get on these questions?
Well, we've talked a lot about just the political risk for Republicans and their questioning in this hearing if it does happen. But I've talked to a lot of Democratic sources who are preparing their own questions for this hearing in terms of the uncomfortable questions that they will ask Judge Kavanaugh. Aides tell me that they are preparing questions on his drinking, on this, prep academy world of the 1980s. Democratic aides are reading Mark Judge's book, where he talks about a lot of this drinking and related behavior. So it'll be a difficult hearing. Sources told us at the Washington Post that Judge Kavanaugh is very well aware of the types of questions that he will face in such a hearing and has been preparing for those questions, but clearly it'll be a difficult situation around for everyone.
And Reihan, Mitch McConnell, the Senate leader, said basically Kavanaugh's going to make it through. So how does he said, don't worry, when this is all said and done, he's going to make it through. How's he going to make it through and still have Chuck Grassley say this is going to be a fair, open inquiry into the facts of the case?
Well, the senator has to say that because he is absolutely convinced that Brett Kavanaugh is telling the truth. Were he to say otherwise, it would be to suggest that Kavanaugh's not being entirely forthcoming. So I find it hard to imagine him saying otherwise, as that would throw into question the fact that they've had so much confidence in him going all along.
Dan, what do you think the scenarios are for this as it goes forward? We've talked about how fraught it's going to be, but what if everybody's made up their mind? It looked like this nomination was on its way to a confirmation. So what do we think might plausibly happen?
Well, I think it's impossible to know at this point how a handful of senators ultimately will make the judgment. I mean, this is going to play out in front of the whole country, but in many ways, it's a focus on a handful of senators who will decide Judge Kavanaugh's fate in the end. And I think those senators, some Democrats, some Republicans, will be watching this closely, trying to gauge public opinion in their states, and trying to understand better what are the risks for themselves if they go one way or the other. So they're going to be making a judgment on the credibility of both of these people when they testify, but they're also going to be making a political judgment about their own futures.
Right.
That's right.
And that's what it looked like in 1991 as well, right? I don't think as that was happening, people were able to digest the impact that this hearing was having. And then, of course, 1 year later, you have the rise of all these women candidates, and the name of the 1992 election was the Year of the Woman. We already have the Year of the Woman this year. But it feels a little bit like that game Pachinko, where you watch this ball and you can't quite figure out which way it's going to go, right? And you're all prepared for it to go this way, and then it pings over that way. I think anybody trying to be able to understand how people are processing this in live time is going to be very difficult, and the repercussions are going to continue long beyond these hearings.
Right. It seems to me the one of the repercussions is that inquiry in the service of trying to figure out the facts can be turned very quickly into making it look like you don't believe this happens, or that you misunderstand the experience of women and the powerlessness they've felt in these kinds of situations, which empowers an entire voting bloc.
And as Seung pointed out, there are also risks for Democrats looking like they are really besmirching the reputation of this person.
Exactly. All right, we're going to pause there. We'll be back with more from our panel. Stay with us. And we're back with more from our panel. Dan, I want to start with you you were out in Colorado talking to voters. What'd you hear?
A couple of things, John. One, on this issue of Judge Kavanaugh and Dr. Ford, very polarized reactions. If you talk to Democrats or people who are thinking of voting Democratic, they believe Dr. Ford. They are convinced that she is absolutely right, and they think he should not be confirmed. If you talk to people who are supportive of President Trump, you get the completely opposite view, that this is an unfair allegation. They don't believe her. They have questions about the timing of it, all of that. Having said that, I think there's another element to that, and that is I think that the people who are opposed to Judge Kavanaugh or inclined to vote Democratic seem to feel more passionate about this, and that depending on how these hearings go, that could further energize them. These are people who are already energized to be active in this campaign, many in ways that they had never been active before in terms of doing phone banks or canvassing or things like that. This is adding one more element to their energy.
Seung, in all of your reporting, you're trying to figure out just when the hearings are going to be held,
Yes.
who's going to do the questioning and all of
Sure.
and all of that. People often, when they see a situation like this, they say, leave the politics out of it. This is about getting to the truth. But in your conversations, give me a sense of how much the politics is a part of what people are thinking then is in their head as they're trying to simply hold a hearing to try to get to the bottom of a difficult question.
Well, it's just, you cannot divorce the politics from all this. And I think what's been interesting to watch, we talk about how energized Democrats are, how good of prospects that they have in November. We always caveat that with the fact that the Senate has a very different map than the House does in the broader national map. And I thought what Senator Claire McCaskill said this week in her announcement that she will oppose Judge Kavanaugh to be very interesting. And this is in the heat of reporting on these allegations. Clearly, she's a female senator. These are very important issues to her. She's a former federal prosecutor. She said, obviously the allegations do give me concern, but that is not why I'm voting against Judge Kavanaugh. She actually cited campaign finance as a reason why she was opposing him and some of his past writings and concerns on campaign finance. So she is in a very difficult re-election race. She has to win over independents and Trump voters. So you just, reading that statement, you just saw how she was just really trying to balance that line. But at the same time, you have a lot of Democrats saying to their base and to their voters, if you are angry about what is happening in the Senate right now, know that it's because Republicans are in charge, so come out and vote. So it's just, again, cannot separate the politics from all this.
Reihan, we've got 6 weeks, basically, before the voting starts. In the last election, people had a lot of theories about the way things will work. Many of them were not correct. What is your view of the way things stand now in this election? What strikes you? What are you watching?
I believe that you have a universe of voters. You don't have a vast universe of swing voters, but you have a small universe of them. You have the so-called Romney-Clinton voters who switched from red to blue the last time around, and that's roughly 3% of the electorate. You have so-called Obama-Trump voters. That's about 5% of the electorate. And it does seem as though Democrats have done a pretty good job of consolidating the former group, the Romney-Clinton voters. If you look at the Obama-Trump voters, that's a dicier proposition, particularly if you're looking at the Rust Belt, if you're looking at the Great Lakes. These are regions where it seems as though some voters who might have been reluctant to back other Republicans who are willing to give Donald Trump a shot, it's not entirely clear that he has galvanized those voters. It is not entirely clear they are as energized as they had been in 2016. And that is really, really tough because the Republican Party is a party in flux. It's not obvious that the Republican Party of Paul Ryan, who is, of course, now heading for the exits, is a party that really speaks to those voters and energizes them. It's also not entirely clear that Donald Trump's focus on cultural issues that are polarizing are necessarily motivating for that group of voters. That's very, very crucial to the party's future.
But yet President Trump is staying on those crime, immigration topics.
He is going to keep talking about those things until they prove to not work. He has one speed, and that's the speed he's always been on since the day he came down the escalator, the day he was sworn in as president, and today. He believes that that ultimately is important. If there's one thing that really we got wrong in terms of all the theories about 2016, it was that the enthusiasm clearly was not on the side of Hillary Clinton, right? And we heard these anecdotal stories about driving across rural America and you'd see barns painted with Trump signs. Nobody saw Hillary Clinton signs. And you sort of dismiss that as, well, lawn signs don't vote.
Right.
But what was clear was that this energy and enthusiasm for Trump was there in places that a lot of us don't live, right? What's clear this year is that energy and enthusiasm is there for Democrats.
All right, last word. Thanks, Amy. Thanks to all of you.